Hey guys, it's Will here. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to David Goldman today. He's a registered dietitian, but he's got an amazing background, and we're going to talk about intermittent fasting. And this chat's going to be talking mostly about fat loss and a little bit of retaining muscle and even muscle building, and using intermittent fasting. And I just want to have you guys try to keep an open mind and just listen to this. It's potentially a tool that you can use in your own life if you're interested in giving it a try. But David's got an amazing background, as I mentioned. He worked at Facebook, and he became their first dietitian, and he developed a nutrition program there. And he collaborated with chefs, physicians, and fitness professionals, software developers to build out and integrate Facebook's offerings and improve the health of their 10,000 employees. He's got a degree from the Colorado University and a master's as well from Columbia University in applied physiology and nutrition. He's worked as a certified strength and conditioning specialist for Columbia University Athletics. He's taught graduate courses in physical fitness, weight management, nutritional biochemistry. He's working at True North, which I've done interviews with Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Goldhamer, and his goal is to disseminate information on the impact of fasting, and using a whole food plant-based diet on disease prevention. And he's managing the True North fitness program and offers patients, personal training sessions and nutritional consultations. So without further ado, I'd like you two guys to listen to this chat, and we go through intermittent fasting and some of the benefits of that. Hi, David. Welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I just thought we'd go through some questions on intermittent fasting because I like to educate people and provide some science about this and provide an option that people might consider that they may not have considered before to help them with fat loss and even building muscle and other. We can talk about health benefits and subsequent chats as well. So I was wondering if you could just describe or define what intermittent fasting is for people that aren't familiar.
Sure. So intermittent fasting is basically cycling periods of fasting or not eating with periods of really eating. We call it ad libitum, meaning as much as you want. So let's say that a typical person might have breakfast at 7 a.m. They might eat at 1 p.m. for lunch, and then dinner might come at 7 p.m. So they're actually intermittent fasting to some extent. They break their fast with breakfast at 7 a.m. and then let's say they finish their dinner at 8 p.m. So they're feeding for a 13-hour period. They're fasting for an 11-hour period. So we would consider that, to some extent, an intermittent fast. And there's actually, maybe I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit, but there actually is kind of cool data supporting that even such a not really extreme form of intermittent fasting as that has been shown to have really fantastic benefits in terms of, there's one study looking at, sorry, I know I'm getting ahead of myself and talking about studies and things, but just something I'll just say that condensing that window further may have even further benefits than having a longer window. So if I was to then, let's say, skip breakfast, eat lunch at noon, have a snack at 3, maybe dinner at 6 or 7, I finish at 8. Now I've condensed that feeding window into, let's say, an 8-hour feeding window. That's more fasting than feeding in a given day. So really, any way that we condense feeding into a shorter period of time, extend the fasting window, that's really what we consider intermittent fasting. And then, by the way, that can come across within a given day. So it could be like Monday, I eat as much as I want. And then Tuesday, I eat nothing. And then Wednesday, I eat as much as I want. And I go back and forth. So there's lots of different types of intermittent fasting. They take many different forms, multiple permutations of it.
So why would somebody consider doing this? Or like, I know you work with patients that may do this as opposed to just eating like say a low calorie density or fruits and vegetables and legumes, whole grains. Why would they consider intermittent fasting, like more than just the typical window?
Yeah, so I always recommend that the very first thing that I recommend to my patients is that they dial into the actual quality of the food they're eating. So absolutely recommending a plant food diet. We have additional qualifications on that here at True North. We pull added salt, oil, and sugar out of the diet. Exclusively whole plant food is what we're really gunning for. So that I definitely see as the most important thing to do. Far more important than the fasting part is what you're actually eating when you are eating. But if we can add some form of, whether it's intermittent fasting or extended fasting to that protocol, we see fantastic benefits. So for example, research looking at alternate day fasting. So this is where, like I said before, you might eat as much as you want on Monday, eat nothing on Tuesday, eat as much as you want on Wednesday, and go back and forth. The biggest killer, we see heart disease is a real problem, and we know alternate day fasting has been shown to reduce the risk of heart disease. It lowers our blood sugar, it lowers our blood pressure, drops our cholesterol, our triglycerides come down, and markers of inflammation come down. And that's all just from alternate day fasting. It does amazing things across multiple different disease conditions. Type 2 diabetics have been shown to drop their fasting insulin from alternate day fasting by 20 to 30%. The reason why I do it personally isn't because of either of those. I happen to really, so I have dementia and Alzheimer's runs in my family, kind of scares me, to be honest with you. And we know that at least in animal models, alternate day or intermittent fasting, specifically actually alternate day fasting, is shown to basically essentially make them smarter. It promotes what's called neuronal autophagy. It causes the brain to basically chew itself to pieces. It kind of eliminates the weak links in the brain. It gets rid of the old decrepit cells and allows for new, smarter, stronger brain cells to come in. Growth of new neurons come in. There's a protein called BDNF that goes up, and it basically may promote healthy brain aging. And so, I mean, the benefits abound in terms of cancer. I mean, there's so many different ways in which this can be really productive. I mean, I could spend like an hour on that alone.
So that's just for people that are, say, they're already doing a plant-based diet. This is in addition to the benefits of eating a plant-based diet?
Definitely. I would not recommend someone continue to eat, let's say, a standard American diet and have the first line of improvement for their health come through intermittent fasting. I would first recommend that they address the quality of the food that they're eating when they actually do eat, and then we would talk about a fasting regime in addition to that if it was appropriate.
And just to be clear, like when you're saying ad libitum and that, is there any or studies or from your experience, like, is it the fact that they end up eating fewer calories over a period of time, like a week or whatever, or is it something, for the same amount of calories, if they pushed it into a smaller window, they would have more fat loss or something like that?
So are you saying that? I'm sorry. I guess can you clarify? You're saying that is it the weight loss itself that produces the benefits, or is it something beyond that? Is that?
Well, what I was saying is
or is it a greater restricted feeding window? Or are you saying that to condense feeding into even fewer hours promotes even more weight loss? Is that where you're going?
Yeah. Is the fact, like, if you say you ate as much as you wanted one day and then you didn't eat the next day,
yeah.
If assuming they lost fat, would that be because of a calorie reduction, or is there something about intermittent fasting itself that would increase fat loss beyond just the potential reduction in calories?
Gotcha. So, I mean, intermittent fasting does seem for most, I shouldn't say for most individuals, in research looking at obese individuals who are doing what's called a modified alternate day fast, we see weight loss. So that means that on, let's say, Monday, they're eating as much as they want. Now, Tuesday, like I said before, they would fast. In these studies, they're eating about 25% of their energy needs, so that'd be 300 to 500 calories. So a lot of people can stick to this. It basically just means you eat lunch. Every other day, you just eat lunch. On the other days, you eat as much as you wanted to. Obese subjects, I can think of 2 studies off the top of my head where the obese subjects lost weight, but lean subjects actually maintained weight on that plan. A true alternate day fast, we definitely see body weight drop, but even without the weight loss, we definitely do continue to see health improvements even regardless. Improved insulin sensitivity and a few other things, but reduced markers of inflammation, things like that. But the benefits, I'm sorry, I feel like I dodged your question. You said, hit me one more time with that.
For people that do like any type of intermittent fasting, like alternate day or 16/8 or whatever.
Yeah.
If for the people that have lost fat, do you think it's because they just end up eating fewer calories over time?
Yes, definitely.
It's not like because of insulin or something. Because a lot of times, I've been watching a lot of low carb videos and reading books and that, and they always talk about insulin is the cause of fat storage, and that's why carbs are bad and stuff like that. So
yeah.
It doesn't seem.
Totally, I think that's you can definitely have higher insulin levels, being on you can modulate insulin through diet, have insulin be higher and still lose weight. Insulin can be lower and you can still gain weight. If I drink olive oil, it's not going to cause my insulin to rise, but I can definitely still gain weight if I pour olive oil over my food. Over time, I think one of the things we end up confusing is that people who are insulin resistant oftentimes tend to be overweight, and that can feed into it. That can be kind of a feedback loop in a way that's really destructive. But intermittent fasting has been shown to drop insulin, like I said, about 20 to 30%. But in terms of actual weight loss that's happening, I would say that that's happening really from the caloric restriction that's typically happening. Now, that's not to say that the body composition, so even though the weight loss might be due to the caloric restriction, there's a really, really cool trial, or I shouldn't say it's a trial, it's actually a review published by a lady named Verity in 2011, and I'll quote from her. She says, results reveal similar weight loss and fat mass loss with 3 to 12 weeks of intermittent caloric restriction and daily caloric restriction. So basically what she's saying is, if you were to intermittent fast or just portion control, let's say a little bit, they're saying that we have pretty much the same amount of weight loss and the same amount of fat mass that's lost. So that's all the same. But then she says, in contrast, less fat-free mass was lost in response to intermittent caloric restriction versus daily calorie restriction. So she's basically saying that maybe we're protecting against the loss of lean muscle a bit more through intermittent fasting. Mm-hmm. But in terms of fat loss, weight loss, it seems to be pretty constant.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about muscle in later on, and that's important. That's really important for people that don't want to lose muscle if they do this. But just to clarify for people, if somebody were to do intermittent fasting, they don't necessarily have to reduce calories, right? Like if they were doing a
Correct.
daily fast, say they ate in an 8-hour window, they could potentially eat more calories than they need for some reason, if they wanted to gain muscle or something.
Yeah, it would be harder to do. It would definitely be harder to, if you're closing a feeding window, it would be harder to create weight gain in that. You could definitely do it. You absolutely could do it. I've seen it.
Yeah, there's no guarantee you're going to lose weight if you intermittent fast, because it has to.
Right.
It has to result in you eating fewer calories just because you don't eat as much or whatever. But
Exactly.
If somebody ends up overcompensating, like if they're starving and they end up binging because they've been waiting so long to eat, they eat high fat foods or whatever. It doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily lose fat on doing intermittent fasting.
Correct. And that behavioral component is a really, really big deal here. I would never bring intermittent fasting into the diet of someone who had a disordered eating, pattern of disordered eating or anything like that. I think it really only makes sense if we can make sure that the quality of the food that's consumed stays really high.
Yeah. So in the high carb, at least online, like YouTube, in the high carb movement or community, there's some concerns about, and maybe other communities, when people don't eat, like this community, like I say, more so online than in the scientific community. I think they, and I've experienced this with my channel. It's like I love food. I started sharing all these amazing, tasty starch recipes, comfort food meals, and pizza and pasta, and we're so happy that we can eat this food and lose weight, lose fat, because we're not putting all the cheese and oil and meat and stuff on it. So everyone's really happy about this and promoting that. But I think in some cases it's kind of gone too far, where it's like unlimited calories and just so there's like a fear of, or a negativity towards like not eating a meal or even eating a smaller amount of food. And one of the things they talk about, or different terms would be starvation mode, metabolic damage, metabolic slowdown, calorie restriction. And I was wondering if somebody actually did reduce their calories using intermittent fasting, is there any concern that their metabolism slows down and then later on it would go up? They would gain a bunch of weight if they started eating more again.
Yeah, I feel that question all the time. That's a very, very common one. I think it's a great question, and it's actually something that I was afraid of. Once upon a time, I grew up reading all these bodybuilding magazines, and they're telling you to eat 6 small meals throughout the day to stoke your metabolic furnace, and if you do that, it'll keep your energy expenditure high. The only study that I've seen that's actually studied what's called resting metabolic rate, basically the amount of calories you burn if you were in a coma. It's basically just without the exercise, without what you're burning from eating food, the processing of food. Showed no change in resting metabolic rate after 22 days of alternate day fasting. So 22 days of eating every other day, fasting every other day, zero change in resting metabolic rate. Now, that's not to say that someone's metabolic rate might not slow, maybe it would slow from an alternate day fasting or from an intermittent fasting protocol, but if it did, it would just be because of the decreased caloric intake, not because of the fasting. So like we were saying before, fasting can result in lower food intake. Lower food intake, will produce weight loss, and weight loss then can slow metabolic rate. But it's not like it would be any more because of the fasting than it would have been if you were just portion controlling a little bit at each meal. So that's kind of important to note. I'll also just throw out that people tend to say, like you were just saying that fasting can cause metabolic damage, and here I'm working at a facility that uses medically supervised water-only fasting for the management of a whole bunch of different conditions. There is data showing that a 2-day fast has been shown to actually increase resting metabolic rate by 3.6%. And a 4-day fast, and this is not intermittent fasting. We're not talking about intermittent fasting at all anymore. Now we're talking about extended fasting. A 4-day fast has actually been shown to increase resting metabolic rate by 4.5%. So if we're talking about skipping breakfast being something that's going to destroy our metabolism, first of all, it's going to do nothing to our metabolic rate. But even a fairly short extended fast, 4 days might not sound super short to most people, but still, here people are going oftentimes to 30 or 40-day fasts. The first few days, we see an increase in resting metabolic rate. The authors are hypothesizing that some of this may be due to an increase in a hormone and a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. And norepinephrine goes up, it helps us find food. It's actually, increases focus, increases attention. It helps us find food. And our metabolic rate may go up as well to help us find food. Our body is not just going to sit back and roll over and let us starve to death. So for the first few days, we see that increase. But like I said, in these extended studies, we see, really no change. So I would not be at all worried. You may drop weight, but like I said, if you drop weight, that is what cause would be. It wouldn't be the cause of the metabolic slowdown. It would just, and if you were to gain the weight back, it would come right back. If anything, I would actually see it being more productive in protecting against a reduced metabolic rate because, like I mentioned in that Verity review, you're protecting against the loss of lean mass, maybe even better than caloric restriction just straight away. So given that lean mass is metabolically active, if anything, I would see it working the other way around. So hopefully that helps to soothe some fears of skipping meals.
Yeah, I also interviewed Dr. Doug Lisle about this, or plateaus and all that. And I like to think of it as equilibrium. Like as you lean out and get lighter, your BMR is lower, and if you start eating more and you gain weight, it's going to go up, and so it's kind of like it's always in equilibrium. It's like these Biggest Losers. The show, they exercise, they cut their calories, they lost a bunch of weight, and then people say, well, when they went off, they gained a bunch back, and it's like, then that's metabolic damage. Like, no, they just ate more, and you're going to hit a new equilibrium based on the new caloric intake and the exercise. It's just generally a balance, and the benefits, like you just said, with intermittent fasting is you won't necessarily lose the lean muscle that someone else might do with a caloric restriction situation.
Yeah,
that's a good that's a really good benefit. I have a book, 3 Squares a Day, which talks about the history of 3 meals a day, but I was wondering if you could talk about like hunger and if people were interested, but like say they get really hungry in the morning, or if they have let's just start with that, with the hunger issues, if you've seen that situation.
Sure. So just like you said, and by the way, I don't know if you can tell, at some point maybe we'll talk about something called a respiratory quotient. This has nothing to do with your question. I'm going to just tangent. I'll just tell you, if you see me shivering or anything like that, I just want you to know it's absolutely freezing in my office right now. And at some point, maybe a later talk you and I have, we'll talk about mild cold stress and why it is that I deliver that to myself. But I just wanted you to know if I'm shaking.
That sounds good.
I'm just acclimating to it. As far as the question that you just asked about hunger, So like you said, so people will oftentimes think that their blood sugar is going to drop, they're going to get hangry if they skip a meal. Again, I'll share with you some research showing that even a 24-hour fast doesn't actually drop blood sugar. Even a 24-hour fast just barely reduces liver glycogen. No more. Actually, I should say barely, but it drops it about 57%. So basically, we still have a whole lot of sugar left in our liver, a lot of glycogen left that can continue to fuel our body with sugar. So, yes, we'll get, we might feel, we might be sensitive to a little bit of a dip, but it's not like the blood sugar itself drops to anything dangerously low. Yes, we might get hungry. We just get hungry at the time that we anticipate a meal. So when we anticipate a meal, we have a beautiful symphony of hormones in our bodies that respond to, that help us basically anticipate what's going to come next. One of them is called ghrelin. And if I am used to eating at 8 a.m. every day, maybe at 7:45, I start to get really hungry and ghrelin is going to go up. Now, that's not to say that I can't adapt to that. It's not to say that my hunger hormones can't change. We see that happen with Ramadan fasting, when people, in the Muslim faith, are eating before the sun comes up, having no food during the day, or water actually, and then eating again when the sun goes down. From a health standpoint, I'm obviously not recommending that you dehydrate yourself throughout the day. I'm just saying that this is what happens in this, during this month. They change the timing of these hormones, so it'll take some time for that to adapt, but you can absolutely make it so that you expect a meal at a different time. If you wanted to intermittent fast, but you get really, really hungry at 8 a.m., give it some time of not eating at 8 a.m., and your body will entrain to that new meal time. I will say that, also people will say, if they skip a meal, if whatever it is, they, how to deal with hunger. I think part of the issue is you can call it, psychosomatic. People tend to think that they're not going to perform cognitively as well. They're not going to be as sharp for work or whatever it might be. Wonderful, wonderful double-blind, placebo-controlled study looking at 2 days of calorie deprivation. Basically showed that there was no adverse effect, none, on cognitive performance, on activity, on sleep, on mood, when people didn't know what the caloric content was that they were eating. If they didn't realize that they were skipping a meal, if they didn't realize that they weren't eating, it didn't affect them. If they didn't know if they were eating, so I think a lot of it is that we project that we're going to be uncomfortable because of this, and then we become uncomfortable from skipping a meal. There's only one study that I know of that directly examined feelings of hunger and fullness in people of a healthy weight who were intermittent fasting. And they did basically 22 days of alternate day fasting. They rated their hunger. And the hunger definitely did increase, and fullness definitely did decrease when the protocol began, but the magnitude of hunger didn't change. It didn't go up throughout the study. Feelings of fullness actually seemed to increase over time. It's possible that if the study lasted more than 22 days, they may have adapted further. So basically what I'm saying is that hunger may go up a little bit, but it'll kind of plateau. You don't have to just think it's going to start spiraling out of control. And that's the only study that I've seen that really looks at hunger in this way. I will say that obese patients may have it differently. If we're looking at a lean person versus a really obese, so another study looking at obese asthmatics, asthmatic patients, people are having a hard time breathing, their bronchial tubes, having a hard time delivering the oxygen that they need. When they were on a modified alternate day fast protocol, so eating every other day, and then on their fasting day, they would eat a quarter of their needs. They didn't experience any more subjective hunger throughout an 8-week intervention. So if you're really, really, if you have a lot of extra weight on your frame, it's possible that your hunger won't even go up at all on an intermittent fasting protocol. Maybe just if you're lean, that happens. So anyway, I just wanted to, I could keep on going on with these things, but for the most part, it's the kind of thing that you'll adapt to, and it's not. And I'll just throw out one other thing real quick. For prolonged fasting, again, I'm not recommending that people try this on their own, but I'll just throw out because if we can push it out to an extreme, you can kind of see that an intermittent fast may not be as scary if a longer fast seems to be amenable. But one study looking at a 14-day total fast of obese patients. So for 14 days, obese patients ate nothing. And they dropped body weight, blood pressure dropped, but they actually didn't experience increased hunger sensations. So there seems to be a hunger suppressing effect of a prolonged fast. And I can tell you anecdotally, all of our patients experience that. It takes them a few days, and then hunger just goes to nothing. So I think it's probably not quite as linear an experience as we tend to think, that if you skip one meal, you get hungry. You skip 2 meals, you get really hungry. 3 meals, and it keeps accumulating. It just doesn't seem to work that way. Yeah.
So just for people, like you're saying, that the hunger that they experience typically 3 or more times a day is kind of learned behavior, and they can, if they wanted to and they're open to trying, they can reconfigure or readjust, when your body learns to be hungry at different times. It's not like,
Absolutely.
because I feel like a lot of people, I've seen this in other situations, but it's like, listen to your body, and if you're hungry, it means that you're deficient in something. If like everything is, it's just a very nervous, sort of scary view of the body. Like if you don't, oh, I'm hungry, okay, that means this, and I have to do this, and or if I crave something, it's because my body wants, something that's in chocolate or whatever that, the craving might happen to be.
Yeah.
And even when I look at starch or a starch diet or whatever, everyone's blown away by the results, but a lot of times, effectively you're reducing your caloric intake because you cut out oil, you cut out higher calorie foods. And if somebody pushes their meals into a shorter window and they end up eating fewer calories, there's even more benefits. The other thing is, I guess we could say that the body has a chance to kind of repair, like you talked about autophagy.
Yeah.
And it gives a chance to not be digesting all the time and have a work on, not that it can't do multiple things at once, but it gives it a chance to kind of focus on other things.
Sure, absolutely, it definitely does. And I'll also just throw out that we tend to look at certain types of stressors as positive and certain types of stressors as negative. If we didn't realize that exercise, that burn that we feel in our legs is actually really, really good for us, it might be really scary. We might think we're having throwing a clot in our thigh or whatever it might be, and it would be a really, really scary thought. But we know that it's good for us, and so we exercise. We endure that pain because we know that it does good things for us. And like I told you, I'm enduring the cold right now, and I know that it does really good things for me, and so I'm thrilled to be doing it. I think if we recognize that fasting is actually, that hunger that we experience, like I said, ghrelin going up, that's actually really important for promoting adaptations, we would maybe embrace that hunger to recognize that one of maybe the biggest difference that I've seen between people who, just chronically restrict calories, let's say they eat about a third less than their body requires, versus people who intermittent fast, the biggest difference seems to be what happens or doesn't happen in the brain, at least in animal trials, where actually experiencing hunger is required for the brain to be able to function without optimal support. And at least in animal trials, we see that making them more resilient to, it's called ischemia reperfusion, basically cutting off blood flow and then reintroducing blood flow. If we allow for our body to adapt to that, to deal with that pain of hunger, we can learn to endure harder conditions. And that hunger is actually required for that to happen. We actually have to experience the hunger to experience some of these benefits, that BDNF, that protein that increases in the brain. So I think if we start to look at hunger as training for the brain, it can be really, really virtuous.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there's different areas where the thing that we're doing causes like stress that our body adapts or responds to in a positive way. It's I also even read, people talk about, and I haven't fully studied this yet, but when we think about plants, we think about nutrients and fiber and phytochemicals and stuff. And I was reading that the fact that plants have certain protective, because they can't run away, they have certain things that are kind of negative, chemicals and things to prevent being eaten, let's say. Yeah. And when we eat those, our body responds to the negative aspects of that plant. It's not necessarily the just all benefits of that plant. It's that we're actually getting exposed to some of these things, like whatever you want to call them, toxins or something, and then we respond to those to create more positive, chemicals or whatever to that, sure, to those negative aspects. So, and that's like you said with lifting weights, cardio. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah. I think what you're saying, I wasn't exactly sure where you're going with it, but I am with you 1,000%. And it's nice when a concept like this pervades multiple walks of life. So like you're saying, we were talking about with exercise being a positive thing. And by the way, there actually are some overlapping benefits between exercise and fasting. I mentioned that BDNF goes up and it's a protein that promotes, basically makes us smarter. But like you're saying with plants, it's really interesting. It works the same way, where if research looking at organic versus conventionally grown produce, like you're saying, if we spray a plant, it's not that the micronutrients, it's not that the vitamins and minerals might be any different, conventional versus organic. If anything, conventional might even come out looking like the winner. But the real win seems to come in that if we don't offer protection for this plant, then it has to upregulate its own natural defense system against, and that's where we'll see phenolic compounds that are going to be really powerful antioxidants. We'll see things that, this is where we see those things like you have lycopene and resveratrol. These are those sorts of things that can help protect the plant against an intruder. And so if we can just condition ourselves to be comfortable enduring the same way that the plant is enduring, that's really where the magic seems to happen. So I think the more we can recognize that discomfort is actually health promoting in many ways. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I'm not planning on keeping her away from, guys who might want to date. I'm going to have her, introduce her to the meanest biker guy ever, have her heart broken, and she'll come back stronger for it, right? No, I'm not actually going to do that. Actually going to do that, but I definitely wouldn't want to shield her from heartbreak. She'd grow stronger from that, So as much as I might want to, I think this is one of those things that seems to carry across multiple different ways, is that the discomfort can feel uncomfortable, can feel threatening, it can feel unproductive, but at the end of the day, oftentimes it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've been on various Facebook groups and YouTube and all these different areas for forums and things for 3.5 years or so, and there's a lot of problems with eating, like digestive issues, especially when you change your diet. And so, like, for what I'm trying to say is that eating in this world, in some circles, is like, and I love eating and I love all this food and everything too, but it's gone too far, like as a sort of a worshipped thing that, especially in excess, even if it's plants and healthy stuff. But when people switch diets, they can have digestive issues. Even if you're accustomed to it and you have for whatever reason you overeat, you have the big huge smoothie, or you eat this big plate of something because there was maybe some salt or whatever, and you end up being uncomfortable. Your body's digesting, you feel tired and lethargic, and you don't want to work out. And I'm just trying to say, like, there are alternatives where, like, somebody might get up in the morning and they're not really hungry, or they get used to not eating right away, and then they might do a workout of some kind. And whereas, like, a lot of people think, well, you got to eat, you need food for energy to give you energy for that workout. And it's like, I think about it, my body's going to burn my stored fat when it doesn't have any energy from food. So the only way it's going to dip into my fat stores essentially is when it doesn't have any food that, like, stored glycogen or stuff that I've been eating. And so I've got plenty of energy, or other people, like I do have some, but I mean, depending on how much fat people have, there's lots of energy sitting there. So the idea, like, if you don't eat, you're going to have no energy, or you're going to have, you're not going to want to do anything. I mean, I'm sure when you guys have fasting, people that fast for long periods of time, they don't do a lot of activity.
Right, an extended fast for sure. But I think what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense. I think it depends on the task that you're about to perform. If you're about to go run a marathon, we would definitely want to get some food in you before that. But who's running a marathon on a daily basis? I have no problem, like I said before, about a 24-hour fast dropping liver glycogen by 2/3. A 12-hour fast drops it by about 1/3. You can definitely go and lift weights for an hour and you're going to be totally fine. You can go for a 5K run and you're going to be totally fine. You're going to have enough carb to take care of you there. Just like you're saying, I think it depends on the task that we're looking for. It depends on what goals are actually sought, if it's maximal muscle growth or if it's just general health or if it's losing body fat. We can tailor these to the individual, but just to make a blanket rule of that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I don't have fuel for any task that I'm about to do right now, even if it's climbing a flight of stairs. We can take this to the point of absurdity. So I definitely think, just like you're saying, that we maybe push the pendulum too hard in one direction. And conversely, I probably wouldn't be exercising intensely if I was, at the end of a 2-day fast. That would probably be a mistake to do. I probably wouldn't, probably more detriment than benefit at that point.
Yeah. That's really good. So, a lot of the people, the doctors and that, are saying, to eat until you're satiated and obviously within a certain range of calorie density.
Mhm.
But are there certain scenarios or where people should track calories or estimate calories? Like if say they want to be really lean, like say they are a bodybuilder or or something where they want to be really defined, or maybe there's other scenarios, but where it's not ad libitum and they have to be a little more conscious of what they're eating.
Um, well, it's funny. I mean, to use the word conscious, sometimes I think that it requires more conscientiousness or more consciousness, I guess, to pay attention to the quality of food as opposed to just to say, I'm going to eat some nasty things, but I'll moderate it in portion control, enter it into MyFitnessPal or whatever it might be. So I guess I once upon a time I calorie counted and I tracked those things, and I worked with a lot of patients doing that. I've trained a whole bunch of I brought a whole bunch of bodybuilders to competition and in athletic environments, and a whole bunch of these various, also in hospital settings. I worked in a hospital for 5 years, so I understand that there are going to be places where we're going to end up using equations for these things. I personally, I tend to see it as fairly primitive because I don't think all calories are created equally, and there are different effects of each of them in the body. So I guess I don't personally do that anymore. Once upon a time, I would write really, really prescriptive diets for people. For a 3-month period, cutting down for a bodybuilding competition, sure, but almost always I'll see people's weight rebounding right back up, and it ends up leading to some kind of disordered eating sort of thing. And I personally did that myself in the past, so I totally get it. But I definitely think that you can cut to exquisitely low body fat, low single-digit body fat percentage without counting a single thing. It just makes it so much more fun to eat when you don't have to weigh your food out. We're also notoriously bad for eyeballing how much food we're actually eating. So I think it just kind of rips the joy out of eating to do that. I just don't think it's necessary. The only time when I might, like in a hospital setting, I totally get it. If I'm tube feeding a patient, sure. And also maybe to do it like once a year for a day if you wanted to, just to get a sense of what it is that you're roughly eating. But yeah, I really don't think it's worth doing.
So if somebody was eating like a whole food plant-based diet, pretty much like starch, rice, beans, and legumes and that, and they wanted to get leaner, instead of counting calories, with just going into an intermittent fasting situation, or do they need to lower their calorie density with more vegetables, or other things that you'd suggest, if it's not
the latter and then the former? Yeah, first is I would play with the composition of what I'm eating, and then I would use intermittent fasting only for weight loss, only once those other things are already dialed in. So just like you're saying, reducing calorie density, increasing intake of non-starchy vegetables, to whatever extent possible. And I know that this next thing I'm going to say kind of rides against calorie density a little bit, but I'm a big advocate, a big proponent of using legumes in higher quantities for fat loss. So again, this is where I see all calories not being created equally. Legumes have 600 calories per pound. That seems, it's like double fruit. So you'd think that you could eat twice the quantity of fruit as you would legumes to have the same amount of calories. So everyone would say, hey, might as well just eat the fruit. I'll be able to eat more food and I'll feel more full. But there are effects that go beyond just calories that legumes have in the diet. They cause what's called a second meal effect. Basically, not only do beans and it was originally called a lentil effect because it originally was looked at lentils and in lentils, but basically not only is that meal that you're eating with those legumes going to release more slowly into your GI, so, from your stomach into your intestine and make you feel more full, but it'll also hook you up for the next meal. So if I eat dinner with legumes, my breakfast the following morning ends up releasing more slowly from my stomach into my small intestine. So I see increasing legume intake actually is a really, really big deal. It's actually one of the biggest holes that I'm delighted to be able to help my own patients fill when they're following a starch-based diet. And they get down from, let's say 300 pounds to 200 pounds or 250 to 150, but they can't get that last like 10% off or whatever it is that will allow their abs to glisten or whatever it might be. That's one of the times when I push greens and beans as hard as I possibly can. And then, once greens and beans are the majority of the food visually on a plate, and there's some fruit for sure, and there's some potatoes and rice or whatever those low protein starches might be, totally cool, but not comprising the majority of the plate, then I'm totally cool throwing some intermittent fasting in some way into the regime.
No, that's really good. That's really good information.
Thanks.
I'm probably gonna, I called myself Potato Strong, and it was because, well, there's a story there, but basically I started eating grilling vegetables, and I was starving, like, asparagus, carrots, zucchini, and I ate all this stuff, and I was just like, this isn't working, I can't do this. And then I discovered like starch solution, and I was eating potatoes, and they were so filling.
Yeah.
And it's like there's a satiety index, and it's like the highest one.
Yeah, white potatoes kill it. It's like 323 or something like that for white potato. It's something huge, right? Highest of any food.
Yeah, and in a sense, I pigeonholed myself a little bit, but I don't want people thinking just because I call myself Potato Strong, like people say, where's the potato? If I eat rice and vegetables, like where's the potatoes? But and I'm like, that's just, it was Rip Esselstyn had a thing, he was calling plant strong diet.
Plant strong.
And I thought Potato Strong sounded a little more interesting or tasty than plants, and I'm starting to think about potentially changing it, but especially now that I've been, or not now, but for the last quite a while, I've been doing calisthenics, and I've definitely thinking, and I have been, but I'm thinking like just what you just said too, is pushing more of the beans and the legumes, and I do eat, but potatoes and rice, like you said, they are lower. I don't want to, because I read Proteinaholic, I'm not pushing anybody to pound tons of protein, but
I think it's also important to distinguish. I just want to throw out real quick in terms of the protein. I'm personally a big protein. I follow a fairly high protein diet. There is a difference though between protein from supplements and protein from meat versus protein from plant food. I don't think that anyone would say that excluding a very limited percentage of, let's say, renal patients, kidney patients, that the protein that one would get from a legume would be, I think that would be a very, very worthwhile thing to include. Shown to increase longevity actually better than, or to relate to increased longevity better than any food. There's a really cool study looking at, I want to say, Costa Rican adults, that it predicts, anyway, just a really, really fantastic food.
Yeah, beans was one of the commonalities between all the longest living. But for people that are like, I'm in one of the groups, the main ones was McDougall Friends, which is, they always quote that somewhere where he said not to eat more than a cup of beans, and he's worried about the protein content, and I try to keep an open mind where I don't necessarily, definitely they deal with the sicker people amongst us, but he does worry about protein as you get higher because of IGF-1 and things. Even though it's plant-based, he doesn't want people eating soy protein isolate from these the mock meats and stuff.
And I agree with him 1,000%. By the way, he's just down the road from us here in Santa Rosa, and he's kind of collaborates with our founder here.
Lucky.
And he's fantastic. He's a brilliant man. And I could be totally wrong, but I believe that his stance on legume, I believe that he is pro-legume. I don't know what was written in the past. I hadn't read those books, the original McDougall, the books that he had written, but I think he's actually fairly pro. I also think it's kind of important to say what we rely on this calorie density approach is we use bulk to make us feel full. We use the bulk of the food. We eat a whole lot of food. It's waterlogged and it trips up these baroreceptors in our gut. It's like barometric pressure. They respond to pressure. So the food presses out and makes us feel full. And that's great. But that's just one way of increasing satiety. I mean, we know, and again, I'm not advocating an Atkins or low-carb diet by any means, but I will say that even though they're eating fairly low bulk, the protein is also very satiating. It's also very thermogenic. So why wouldn't we take the best of both worlds if fat loss is sought? Also knowing that higher protein intakes can be protective against muscle loss in the face of a caloric deficit, why wouldn't we take advantage of all of the health-promoting benefits of legumes, hit up those receptors that respond to protein, and then do the same thing. And also, the legumes are one of the few things that have a whole lot of protein and a whole lot of fiber, a whole lot of bulk. So it can kind of work as a double whammy in working in multiple directions for our feeling full. Just a wonderful weight loss tool.
So that since we talked about carbs and protein, and your suggestion, to move towards more for people that are, once they get to a certain point, the beans and the greens instead of, a little less of the starches like rice and potatoes. What about fat, like as far as nuts and seeds and avocados and things? Because protein is satiating. They also say in the low carb movement that fat, slows the release of stuff from your stomach and makes you feel full and all that. And,
sure.
And
so how much fat do we want to include in the diet? How much is that what you're saying? Like, do we want to include some nuts and seeds and avocado? So I just wrote an article, was published in Health Science magazine, where I talked about this a little bit. I have no problem with nuts. I have no problem with seeds. I have no problem with avocado, with tempeh. But I will say that the quantity is really, really important. So if I'm looking for weight loss, I don't want to start snacking on nuts. There's a concept called passive overconsumption. We basically end up eating a whole lot more of these things than we think that we are, and it can really stop weight loss dead in its tracks. Now, if you're looking for weight gain, I'd have no problem with eating, more nuts to make that happen. Same thing with avocado. I don't like the use of oil for any purpose, really. I think other than my car, I think it's fairly useless in a human. So, yeah, I have no problem with those foods. I would just scale it up or scale it down depending on what the person's needs are. If you're a triathlete eating a potato-strong diet, we probably wouldn't be able to get enough calories into you without modulating fat intake appropriately. And same thing with fat loss. We can keep fat intake fairly low. We still make sure you get your omega-3s. Super easy to do. 1 tablespoon of ground flax gets you, I think it's 119% of your daily requirement for ALA. So, you can easily get your essential fatty acids. People tend to think, I don't know, a lot of people will say like that they need the essential fats found in almonds or avocado. There really are none. I mean, almost none in most nuts. I mean, walnuts have some, but I think we can hit those requirements pretty easily. We can actually even get them without even taking those seeds. If we're eating a whole lot of green leafy vegetables, we can get plenty of omega-3s in that way too. So I think fats are fine to include, just to pay attention to what the person's goals are and tailor it appropriately.
Yeah, because people are saying you need fat to digest or to absorb various, vitamins and minerals. And, I always try to say that, there is fat in these foods. It's not like we're not eating any fat. But it doesn't have to be 40% fat to digest those, nutrients.
Exactly. And if a McDougall diet, let's say, is 10% or 11% fat, we don't see anyone, so the fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. We don't see people on the McDougall diet deficient in vitamin K. We don't see them deficient in A or E. We don't see these. We would see lots of these deficiencies if you had to increase. See, I like to look at a fat-soluble vitamin more as where does it store itself in my body's tissue. Does it store in my water? Does it in the muscle? Like vitamin B, the B vitamins are water soluble, so I'm typically going to have more of those because I'll urinate them out. But the fat soluble vitamins tend to lodge themselves in our fat stores. I think that yes, fat can enhance the absorption of these foods, but I think that, like you're saying, all diets are going to have some quantity of fat in them, and it's really not something that we need to be too concerned about.
Yeah. Okay, just a few questions around muscle building, because I'm interested in that. I hope some people are watching. And you already mentioned that some studies that showed that intermittent fasting retained lean mass, which is really good news for people that are worried if they don't eat 6 meals a day, like the bodybuilding mentality, that they're gonna, start losing muscle. And are there any? I read somewhere, like you mentioned, the insulin sensitivity. I also read that there's increases in growth hormone.
Yep.
Is that beneficial towards muscle building, or would you do intermittent fasting to help muscle gains if you're working out?
No, honestly not. Just like you said, yes, fasting does increase growth hormone secretion. There's research I can share with you showing that it does it by as much as 5-fold, which is, that's a lot. And there are other I don't see growth hormone as particularly anabolic in a fully grown person. So if I'm me or you, if we were to shoot growth hormone, we wouldn't build a huge amount of muscle. It's more anti-catabolic. It basically protects against muscle loss. The same way that insulin is pretty anti-catabolic. It's not like insulin itself causes us to grow a whole lot. It's more anti-catabolic. So I wouldn't try to use the increasing growth hormone as a way to increase muscle mass. There are studies looking at intermittent fasting and resistance training to see, how do they pair together. And there was two published just at the very middle or end of 2016, and I think they implemented one of them was terrible, one of them was okay. The one that was okay, they used like a 16-8 approach. They fasted for 16 hours and they ate 8 hours, and they resistance trained. I believe that the intermittent fasting group dropped body fat compared to the normal diet, while their muscle mass and strength, maximum strength, maintain. So both groups maintain their strength and their muscle, but the intermittent fast group, without counting calories, dropped body fat. Testosterone and IGF-1, so two anabolic hormones, did drop in the intermittent fasting group. No changes in the normal diet. But really, I wouldn't use intermittent fasting as a way to increase muscle, even though theoretically, like you're saying, growth hormone and whatever. But I wouldn't. I would be very surprised if intermittent fasting increased muscle mass. And again, there's no data to support this just yet. But I'd be surprised if muscle mass increased more from an intermittent fasting protocol compared to just eating, 4 meals spread throughout the day or 5 or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But we'll wait and find out what the study said.
So if somebody was doing intermittent fasting and they wanted to build muscle while they were losing fat, what do you have a general idea of what the protein requirement would be?
Well, I would say intermittent fasting or not intermittent fasting, we would still get the protein intake around the same. And let me just say that you can build muscle actually, there's a few pieces of that question here. You're saying building muscle and losing fat and intermittent fasting at the same time. The first thing I would say is that building muscle and losing fat at the same time are really, really hard things to do simultaneously. There are only a few times in life when this could actually be possible. Like one is if you've never lifted weights in your entire life, and now you're lifting weights. It's possible to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. If you've never taken anabolic steroids and now you're taking anabolic steroid, you can do those sorts of things. But for people who have been training for a long time, those happening simultaneously is kind of the holy grail, but not really exquisitely doable. I would say that no matter what, if we can build muscle unquestionably with the RDA, or even less than the RDA, 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. No question about it. We can absolutely put on muscle, and it might just be a little bit slower than if we were to increase protein intake a bit. So I will say that there's a difference between how much is required to build muscle versus how much is required to optimally and maximally build muscle. So if we were to looking to maximally build muscle, I tend to look back to a particular study, 2011, Phillips and Van Loon say, and I'm quoting from them, protein intakes in the range of 1.3 to 1.8 grams of kilogram per body weight per day will maximize muscle protein synthesis. And really, as you've been lifting for longer, as you've been training for longer, you need less protein. So that 1.8 number is only in the very, very, very beginning for people who have really never lifted before. As you have a higher training age, you're not building nearly as much muscle. Maybe your first year of lifting weights, you're putting on a dozen pounds that year. 5 years in, you're lucky to eke out a few pounds of muscle. So you would need less protein because your body isn't, adding it to your frame to the same extent. Your body becomes more efficient at cycling protein too. So roughly, let's say doubling the RDA at around 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, which I think can be totally done on a plant-based diet without using supplements. I think it's entirely doable. I can show you my lunch. But like I said, I also don't think that most people need to make that happen. It's just if you're an athlete, like a competitive athlete seeking maximal gains right away. Otherwise, don't really pay attention to your protein intake. You're going to be fine and getting plenty of it as it is.
So like if they were doing intermittent fasting, it would more be a workout that would maintain the muscle. Like they wouldn't be trying to increase their weights. They just try to maintain.
Yeah, unless they're brand new to lifting. If this is the very, very first time that you're lifting weights, you could do the two at the same time. I also don't think it's really necessary. If it was me, I like the idea of adding mass to my frame first. Now I've increased my metabolic rate. I have more lean mass that needs to be supported. And now when I actually do attempt to cut fat, I have more calories to work with in a given day, so I can actually eat more food and cut weight. So if I wanted to lose weight, I could lose weight off of 2,000 calories a day because I've added, I'm not saying I'm a big guy or anything, but I've added an appreciable amount of mass to my frame. And so now my metabolic rate went up, and now I can eat kind of the standard, 2,000 calories is what's recommended. I'd be dropping a good amount of weight just doing that. That wouldn't have been possible if I thought I wanted to cut first and then add mass. So I think that sequence seems to me to be more logical.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so yeah, you mentioned your meal. Just to finish up here, if you were going to do like say 2 meals because you skipped, not skip breakfast, but you delayed your first meal, whatever you want, the semantics of it, but maybe you could show us, and also Do you ever have a breakfast, a typical breakfast? Like
Sure.
oatmeal?
Yeah. So let me show you. So I'll show you a lunch. Let me see if I can even see if you can see it.
Yeah.
So here I have tempeh in what is it? It's like a green salsa verde. So I have that, and that's a decent amount. By the way, I will throw out that 2.5. I want to say I can't remember off the top of my head. I've been looking at, so one of the ways that I can track how anabolic a food is, we look at something called a leucine threshold to see how much leucine is actually in a food. Leucine is the most anabolic amino acid. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how much tempeh I would have to have, something like a serving and a half, although don't quote me on that, to hit my leucine threshold, basically to max out the anabolic properties, the muscle building properties of that food. So anyway, I have a lot of tempeh. Let's call it, I mean, there's a lot of vegetables in there too, but let's call it a serving and a half of tempeh in there. I got some brown rice. I know I'm not worried about the arsenic levels in my brown rice, and that's a conversation for another day. And then I have some cabbage, purple and white cabbage. I forgot exactly. There's some kind of like crumbled nut on there. And then I already ate some of my snap peas, but there had been some snap peas on there. And so this is like a typical lunch for me. I have, the way I see it, I'm basically like a third of my plate is non-starchy vegetables. A third is more starch. And then another third is like protein. I would have beans or, chili or split pea soup or lentil soup or whatever it might be in that portion. And given that I'm having all this tempeh, if I was looking for weight loss, I probably wouldn't be eating that much tempeh.
That's a big portion. That's good.
Yeah.
So do you have that typically like twice a day, similar type meals, or?
Something like that. I would say I probably eat. I play with each of these intermittent fasting protocols personally. I've done each of them. The alternate day fasting I loved. I felt amazing on it, but it's really hard to make happen. Right now, I'm basically eating in a 6 to 8 hour feeding window in a given day. And so that sort of breakdown would be what you'd see for, let's say, 3 meals across that time. If I was eating breakfast, I don't know, maybe I'd have a big bowl of oatmeal, some fruit. I've actually been having, I know it might sound strange, but I have some squash at breakfast too. I actually really like having kabocha squash. It's like incredibly delicious. And so my oatmeal will have flax seeds, cinnamon, and sometimes if I'm gaining weight, I might throw some hemp seeds in there too. But yeah, so that's my breakfasty kind of meal.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. That helps. Hopefully people can get a sense. There's lots of good information in there because like the beans with the protein and sort of, gradually increasing the window if they get a little hungry at 8, maybe trying to push it till 9, slowly push that.
Yeah, and to recognize that we don't have to like be extreme about it. We can definitely, just like you're saying, to nudge it one. In the very beginning, I started to get ahead of myself because I was really excited about our chat. And I was going to say there was one study looking at women in relation to breast cancer, showing that women who had a fasting window of 13 hours, so they fed for 11 hours across a day. That's like takes almost no willpower. You're just basically not snacking at night. So an 11-hour feeding window, reduced risk of breast cancer recurrence by 40%. Which is ridiculous. 40%, that's crazy. And it also reduced risk of mortality from breast cancer by 20%. That 20% didn't reach statistical significance, but still, like, just by not snacking at all hours of the day and night, you see some pretty cool things seem to happen. So anyway, yeah, just like you're saying, 11-hour feeding window, I would just say, just play with it and see what feels good to the individual. Just hopefully this our conversation will help to allow people who want to eat more small, frequent meals to do so, but people who feel like they have to, but would rather not. People who make themselves eat breakfast when they're not interested in eating breakfast, or they make themselves eat lunch when they don't want to eat lunch. Hopefully, we can help free them up a little bit from some mythology surrounding this sort of thing.
Hopefully, you provided us from some really amazing information, and I'll put some some of the references that you.
Yeah, I'll share all of them with you. I'd be very, very happy to give them you, and you can post them. That's great.
Yeah, and I hope we can have more conversations and go into other more health aspects. And like you mentioned, women, which is also I know an issue with intermittent fasting. Some people say should women do it or not? And there's all the health aspects that you've sort of touched upon, but we can delve into more of that as well over time. Thanks so much. It's been really amazing and helpful. I really
Sounds
appreciate
good.
it.
It's my pleasure. Hopefully the inner New Yorker didn't get too excited, talk too fast, and that happens sometimes. So just bear with me.
No, it's amazing.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Take care, Will. My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
See you later.
See you.